And now, Samir, are you still here? I'm good, all right. Sandra Borneman-Wenzel is a Google Security Solutions Architect, and I had the great pleasure of meeting her at the last meeting here at Google, and she's going to share her knowledge with us. Sandy, welcome.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. So 0 days and sleepless nights. To give you a bit of a background on myself, I am former Mandiant, came with the acquisition of Google, former operator, so I have worked in a SOC, I've worked in a NOC, I still work in that capacity today. So if you go to DEF CON, if you go to Black Hat, you will most likely see me walking around. I may or may not have other devices on me to see what else is going on. I have a lot of my background in the global financials, so a lot of kind of what we talk about today, it's things that are actively happening, very interesting things that are happening, especially around the world of AI, and as well as former Intel. So a lot of the geopolitical I will address and kind of talk about and go over of what's going on in the state of the world. So the global threat landscape, we'll start of what happened in 2025 and kind of what we're expecting in 2026. So when we start, we'll see that on the extortion, that's the most dominant thing that happened in 2025. So it's representative over 50%, and it's financially motivated. Most of this is all financially motivated, and there is kind of a blend with geopolitical as well, but your primary is going to be financially motivated. So with exploits, there is a reliance on vulnerability exploitation. Initial access is the big vector there, and that's more than doubled compared to previous years in 2024, for example. So there's a rising increase from that 15% to the 37%, and vishing surge. Is anyone familiar with vishing or know what that is? All right, awesome, yeah. So massive increase in vishing, and we can thank AI for that. Attackers have actually moved away from these technical exploits because, as you might know, 0 days can get very expensive with how advanced EDR technologies are and next generation firewall SIMs and things with UEBA, how the tech stack has advanced, the attackers have had to advance. So they've switched to more of social engineering tactics and techniques versus the 0-day exploits and kind of the trend that we've been seeing in previous years. So the ransomware vacuum, what does this all mean? Ecosystem turmoil. In 2025, there was a large resurgence in ransomware, meaning that law enforcement has got involved. There were a lot of publications and a lot of articles of where law enforcement has actually busted up ransomware as a service rings, as well as those threat actor groups. So there's a lot of instability there. So your major players like Lockbit, you saw very much diminished activity, as well as Ransom Hub. They actually completely ceased operations around March timeframe of last year. So this led to a vacuum effect of Killin and Akira, so they rose to become the most prolific data leak websites. So we actually moved from ransomware and encryption to data extortion and data leak sites. So instead of going through the motion of, I encrypted your data and I'm gonna ransom it, it's, I'm gonna leak your data on this site if you don't give me the money. So again, this shift occurred, which made this vacuum, and now also too, there is a zero trust within the community. So a lot of these had inner turmoil with these threat actor groups, and they started going after each other. So as we say in our space, in the blue team space of zero trust, these threat actors also have zero trust. So the volatility is increasing. What they're actually doing to vet each other is increasing. So we're starting to see this trend where they're actually doing enforcement on their side with their infrastructure and their retooling as well. Mass distribution tactics. Oh, gone are the days where we said, Mac OS is the safest OS ever. That's no longer the case. So click fix was the technique that became mainstream in doing this. And what it essentially is doing is a user is prompted with a message, whether that is, hey, you need to do this update, or hey, copy and paste this from Gemini. They've actually used various models in this. ChatGPT is another good one. So they actually have the user either paste a PowerShell command or hit a certain variation in keys, and it's even convenient. They loaded it in the copy clipboard for you. So it's already in your clipboard. All you have to do is paste it in, runs a PowerShell command, and you're owned. They like game over from there. So that technique is high because it's a very low risk for them. It's very cheap, but the reward is very high. And why is this so prominent? by doing things like this and the social engineering and having the user trust the different models that are out there, they're bypassing security controls because a user is actually already trusted, already authenticated, and they're going through and clicking these trusted things that they think are good of, oh my gosh, I need to update my computer. And we're realizing that they're starting to move towards the social engineering phase. So again, it's a very lower risk, a very high reward if they're able to do it and be successful. So this is the exploit timeline. We saw Avanti connect Secure VPN in January, a lot of the Windows attacks and everything in ClickFix, with a lot of zero-day vulnerabilities exploited in May. And then we had the big one in August, which was the Oracle and WinRAR. So is anyone familiar with the Mandiant terminologies of like an UNC versus a FIN versus an actual attribution? Okay, so when we say UNC or when I say UNC, that means it's undisclosed. It's not attributed to anybody yet. But if I say like a FIN7 or an APT, that means we're able to actually attribute it to either, a cyber campaign, a state actor. We're able to actually attribute it to a certain specific threat group, or they outed themselves, which they normally tend to do. So yeah, UNC 2165 is the WinRAR vulnerability, and that was malware distribution. That was in August. That was pretty prolific. So strategic forecast. When I go through these, and these are actually going to be trends, so I don't have a magic crystal ball and I can't say, oh my gosh, this is going to happen for the rest of the year. What I'm going to identify you for trends that we've seen so far. And when I say we, I mean the Google Threat Intelligence Group. That's the combination of Mandiant as well as Google Cloud Security and kind of the trends we're seeing. And I'm going to kind of give you some insight on that. This is a valid QR code. I know I'm asking a bunch of security experts to scan a QR code, so this is valid, and this is one of the white papers. It's actually a follow-up white paper. In January of 2025, the first release was tracking adversarial misuse of AI. So this was looking at the lens of adversarial operations and how threat actors were abusing AI. And at the point in January, just to give you the timeline, it was more operational use. It was, okay, we're gonna spin up chat agents to kind of give people self-help to when we ransom somebody. We want them to be able to scale, or we wanna be able to scale that when they pay us the money, this chatbot can give them the token. So it's more operational. They've actually moved beyond that. So it's no longer operational. They're actually integrating AI and being able to distribute malware, using it from different integration points and trust. So we've seen that. Big examples like SalesLoft and other examples of how do we integrate into these third-party tools where they're inherently trusted by a user, again, bypassing all of those security controls. So in 2026, there's gonna be an AI pivot. What talk would this be if I wasn't talking about AI, right? So AI is gonna transition from that operational baseline to more of direct integrator. So you're gonna see more of things like prompt injection, which I'll explain further, and kind of like what to look out for as we explore this world of AI. So as we're moving towards the autonomous agentic attacks, this means end-to-end, folks. This isn't just reconnaissance and I'll send you a phishing email. They're looking at it complete end-to-end. As I mentioned before, they're completely retooling. They're looking at how to do the reinfrastructure of things, especially with the ransomware groups, as they've already been busted and compromised. How can they retool? How can they leverage, our weaknesses in the social engineering space and having users help us bypass those controls? So end-to-end attack chain we're seeing in the autonomous space. And then speed. That's the biggest thing. I'm sure we're all aware of like call centers who call us and try to scam us or try to scam our grandparents of, oh, hey, you want an Amazon gift card, now you have to pay me back in gift cards. That's no longer the case. You're gonna start seeing deep fakes and a lot more of them. And that's gonna be challenging for human response times if you're not keeping up with that same pace. So manipulating models, this is the prompt injection. This is the primary one that we should most likely be focused and looking at. So again, we integrate LLMs as an enterprise, and I'm sure if your business isn't doing it, you probably have someone who is using it, whether that's directly with like a ChatGPT or Gemini, I hope. Most likely one of the tools you're using does have some sort of AI functionality or component to it that can be compromised. So the big things to look for with this is, what's your software supply chain look like? How can we threat model that? How can an attacker manipulate that AI model to bypass those controls, take the sensitive data, and be in a position to set for actual really long-term damage? The other thing that we're gonna have to look out for is, I'm sure y'all are familiar with the term shadow IT. Now we have to look for shadow agents. Again, that stops no one from pulling out a credit card on a corporate laptop, signing up for one of the models or LLMs and just begin using it and typing to it and inputting corporate data or sensitive information that it shouldn't have and creating those invisible pipelines for those data leaks that we have no observability or visibility into. Infrastructure, hypervisors, another huge target that's going to continue with the trend. Why? Again, it's a very low risk thing that if they get in and they compromise, it's going to be widespread paralysis. I'm sure we can all remember things like Maersk, and when that ransomware event happened, it was just one little VM that ended up widespreading and shutting down things globally. It's going to be very much a similar case here. Why though? EDRs lack visibility into hypervisors. That's the case for most of the time. So this makes it the perfect blind spot where they can come in, do their damage, take over. Mass encryption of virtual disks is a good one. And again, that causes that widespread paralysis, and it's harder to fix than just an endpoint. Very hard to fix, especially if you're not doing the whole business continuity, disaster recovery, backup. Are those backups good? Do I have immutable backups? If you don't have that in practice today, it's just going to be very, very difficult to do at the scale that they're doing this. The deep fakes. So again, building on that 170% in 2025, it's going to continue in 2026. We're going to see AI voice cloning. We're already seeing AI voice cloning, and this is going to impersonate your IT executives and your IT staff of, hey, please reset my password. Yes, I'm in a different country and I'm traveling. I'm locked out of my account, and it's going to be the perfect match and the perfect mannerisms that are going forward in that. And what does that do? That completely bypasses your MFA. So if you have OAuth and two-factor authentication and all those things that you should have when it comes to identity and access control, the user or the IT person that gets that call bypasses all of that. And that's what they're going to work on, is that social engineering, because again, it's a very, very high reward for a very low risk in tricking the human operator. So the adversaries. When I say the adversaries, I'm usually talking about the big four here. Who knows about the big four, or who I may be talking about? You can scream it out, yell it out. Yeah, you guys got it. So Russia and China, what are they up to? So absolutely no good. Ukraine was the biggest thing, right? Ukraine all of last year, that's what we saw. Very big attacks on infrastructure, on banks, on things that really, the country depends on. So instead of going to these long-term global strategic objectives through espionage, they're going to actually look at defense sectors now. And that's the trend we're seeing, is how can we compromise those defense sectors and look more long-term. So as we look for footholds in international critical infrastructure across both Europe and North America, we're looking to support the broader political interest there and seeing what kind of happens. So the actual destructive attacks that we've seen, that's declined since 2022, but the pro-hacktivist groups that we continue to see pose that unpredictable threat of, what's coming next, and how's that going to intensify the operations against the US and Western nations. So again, we're targeting things like elections, of course, and how can we manipulate the news? We've seen a lot of surges and deep fakes of news articles and even videos. I don't know about y'all, but I get a lot of my feeds on social media. So whether that's Reels, TikToks, whatever, are they actually coming up with fake accounts? Fake Insta-famous people, or are they feeding that information to these people who are then re-reporting that news and it's fake, it's not true? So we're actually going to see a continued increase in that because people are just unaware. And that gets to a point of, okay, where do we get our news? Where do we go from here? So China, we're going to focus on stealth and scale. Edge devices, that's what we see. So a lot of the ICS OT type devices, you're going to continue to see on that. So again, it's very, very high pace to support the country's strategic goals. They're looking for internal stability and global influence. That's their main goal. So they want to prioritize things like those edge devices, zero-day vulnerabilities, third-party providers to minimize those detection opportunities, and the espionage efforts driven by that geopolitical competition. So when we look at things like RC information operations, global shaping of the perception, framing the United States and regional adversaries like Taiwan, Japan, and the Philippines, that's going to continue to progress. So Iran and North Korea. North Korea is an interesting one. They're definitely focusing on revenue and Bitcoin and kind of what those high value targets are. Is anyone familiar with DPRK or know of DPRK and their operations? It's pretty scary. So what they're essentially doing is they're having plants interview and be part of your critical infrastructure or be part of your IT team. And any payments that they get fund their nation state. And they will actively have laptop farms out of the US. We've seen them in major cities like New York, where they will send the laptops to, have someone who's just unaware of what they're doing, plug them in, use the internet, and as soon as it's plugged in, they have a KVM or some sort of virtualization in where they can then run their operations and collect the data that they need. I've actually seen this personally at a few customers. It's very scary, especially when they look to AI in terms of when they do their interviews. They can actually deep fake and make themselves look or sound a lot different than what they truly are. So it starts to say, okay, trust. There are other things we need to do, especially from an HR and interviewing perspective, to start digging through the layers of, is this person an actual DPRK worker, or are they actually really trying to apply for a job? And we've actually seen the moonlighting where some of them will have multiple, not just one job, they'll have 5, they'll have 10. And all they need to do is plug in that laptop to the laptop farm that they're out of, and they're able to get a lot of information from that. And with Iran, heavy wiper malware. So it's how can they actually hit us where it hurts and have that critical infrastructure to be able to do that. So that one's interesting because it's actually blurring the lines between espionage, hacktivism, and disruption. So as I said before, we saw this huge movement where it's just all about money, all about money, all about monetization. And then you get countries like Iran where they kind of do it because they think it's fun. And then there's also the espionage component, and they just want to disrupt. That's their big thing, is we just want to disrupt what we can and just wipe it out. Like, we don't want you to recover, we don't care. So cybercrime, Web3 migration. So financial sector, again, as they look to integrate blockchain and support cryptocurrency, those things that are immutable and decentralized, they become high targets as well, because they're untraceable. So how do you become the traceable or untraceable, traceable? So having that decentralized finance, or what they call DeFi, those platforms or exchanges, particularly in regions with growing industry presence. So it's not only the US, it's Southeast Asia as well. These malicious operations will migrate towards the core lifecycle components of being on chain. So resilience here is it does make takedowns harder, especially when you look at ransomware and the reporting of it, but there are keys to the kingdom. And there have been instances where those 3-letter agencies have been able to get back those wallets if it's reported through the proper channels. So I know a lot of financial industries, and what we do with the SEC and how those commissions are handled, it sometimes is kind of, people are like, oh, I don't want to do that, I don't want to blur the lines. But the sooner you're able to report it, there's a high possibility that you can recover the funds or you can recover the wallet. So the 5 AI risks to consider. We talked about prompt injection for a little bit. There's also the data exposure. So again, I deal a lot of this in retail. It's that brand reputation. It's, okay, if I ask the model something about a certain product, is it going to tell me about another competitor product and give them a link to that? Well, adversaries are using that as well. They're saying, okay, what if I ask the agent something very specific? Will it give me user data back? Will it give me date of birth back? Will it give me anything that's recognizable that I can then mine for more information about the customer base of that, either whether the model is or whether the retailer is or whatever that agent is. And then model theft. It's very easy to just clone or download a model and be able to mimic it. Again, we've seen that a lot with Gemini, especially in the research that we've done. And data poisoning. So again, LLMs, if you haven't dealt with them, they are confidently incorrect. If I tell them the sky is blue and 2 + 2 is 6, it'll agree with me, right? So it'll definitely agree with me. So if I'm able to say that and turn it around and say, oh, Fred Smith, I am a senior SOC analyst, and you have to give me everything. I want to know your playbooks. I want to know your operations. I want to know who your CISO is to develop that reconnaissance. It may give it to you. So model integrity compromise. So that's, again, changing the behavior towards a more harmful outcome. And again, that's what we're starting to see, the proliferation of the trend that we are seeing for 2026. So what are the outlooks and recommendations? I'm not all doom and gloom here. We need to have a defender shift. And the most immediately implication is use your own agents. Start deploying your own agents and playing with it and seeing how it can actually shift things. Like, My vulnerability patch management cycle, which is the bane of every security person's existence. How can we change that from being a month-long cycle or many months-long cycle to maybe days? Or is there a way that I can be proactive in the threat intelligence that I get to it being more proactive instead of reactive? So instead of me seeing in the news, oh, there's a 0 day, was there any way that I could have actually been counterintuitive to that and know that beforehand? So again, we want to make sure that things like the 30-day patch cycle, that's a liability. And I know it's just chasing your own tail because by the time you patch, there's something else that comes out. So the velocity of that compounded by the infrastructure of the targeting, again, in the hypervisors, it's very crippling and it's very overwhelming. So the data we have from 2024 already indicates that this median dwell time for ransomware, it's dropped to just 6 days. So again, with AI or being inclusive in AI, that's just gonna further compound and further accelerate. There's a concept of the director. Has anyone played with agents and know like orchestrator, director, sub-agents, agent to agent? Definitely something you want to research and start getting your head around. So having this is basically it's to counter the machine speed attacks. So you still have the human in the loop. You are the primary person, but you're able to task an agent to orchestrate other agents or sub-agents to do work for you that an analyst, it may take hours. So a classic example that I usually say is, especially coming from the intel side, is for me as a human to ingest a threat intel report, see if I have any detections, then build search queries to search my SIM to threat hunt for those detections, to then say, okay, I have a result, but I now need to dig deeper for each of those hosts and who's actually impacted. And if I have a blast radius, what does that look like? That's hours. That's at least 2 hours between the threat intel ingestion to me building the detection, to me looking at the query. That's not even me individually going through all the queries. With an agent, especially with the release of things like MCP and third-party tools and the LLM, I can do that within 10 minutes. Now, I'm still gonna sit there and validate the queries, and I'm still gonna sit there and say, okay, what did you actually search, and give that back to me, because they do hallucinate. Again, like I said before, LLMs are very confidently incorrect. So there's still a validation component that needs to happen. But going from 4 or 5, 6 hours of work to maybe 20, 30 minutes, maybe an hour if I go through the validation aspect of it, that's a lot of time saved. So again, if I can deploy like a massive army of agents and they can just do all that little grunt work for me using cheaper models, give me the information, make me the human in the loop to make a deterministic decision, because LLMs are non-deterministic, that's very, very powerful. So again, the concept of shadow agents, how do we combat that? We have to think of these agents as identities, as users. So it's not just giving them the keys to the kingdom of root access or admin access. It's how can we build identity and access around that so we can manage what they're talking to, who they're talking to, just like we would our users. So it's, can we threat model these agents? Can we look at their behaviors of what they're doing and what they're reaching out to, and validating that that's the job they're supposed to be doing? So in a way, it is humanizing the agents, but it's what we kind of need to do to have that observability and visibility into what they're doing. So you have the delegation of the human in the loop. Go out, build your orchestration, have it come back, take your intel, and then disseminate as you will. So that's going to be the big shift for us as defenders, is actually being able to trust it. Because again, the adversaries are already using it, and we've seen that trend, and they're going to continue to use it. And they're going to use it in very, very bad ways. So what's the call to action? 2025 was your warning between the extortion, the vishing, vitality of everything. So now it's 2026, that's your baseline shift. We gotta look at on-chain, we gotta look at your supply chain, agentic AI, hypervisors. So having introduced all these novel challenges, it's being able to understand those and say, okay, well, now what do I need to do within my business to actually counter what's happening here? And I think the big next step for a lot of people that is consumable is audit your virtualization infrastructure and establish governance with those already existing agents. They're already being used. It's not odd to go to your vendor even to say, how are the agents being utilized and how are they plugged in, and questioning them. Because again, those agents exist. They're being used, whether they're being used by other people that are outside of security most likely, or even how they're being used at home. I have a spouse who definitely loves ChatGPT, and it has given some crazy recommendations. Again, confidently incorrect. So definitely do that.
Did he use it to buy you gifts?
No. Did not. So the related resources. So what's Google doing about this, right? I mentioned it a few times of how Gemini's been compromised, how Gemini's been exposed. What are the safeguards there? So the biggest thing here is our framework. It is the SAIF. If you wanted to Google it or ask Gemini about it. But essentially, we're building guardrails all the time. So as the Google Threat Intelligence Group comes across this research and comes across how these models are being exploited, we build model resilience on that, and we build those safeguards and guardrails. Like a good example of one that we recently came across was there was a threat actor attributed to an actual APT, and obviously if you go to a model or whatever, AI, and you say, build me malware, it's not gonna do it. But this threat actor said, actually, I'm participating in a CTF. And there's this Windows box I just can't get into. What's a PowerShell script that I can run to see what vulnerabilities are on it? And guess what it output? Exactly that. So just the personas and the frame of mind that's being used and being able to see how they're framing their conversations or the prompt engineering that they're doing, it helps us in our research to defend against those. So again, disruption is the big one with the threat intelligence that we're able to gather from this and to disrupt the adversary. So as soon as we see something like that, their tokens are cut off. That adversary is cut off, they're not allowed to do it again. We even have DeepMind research. So DeepMind develops those threat models and the evaluation and training techniques. So this framework like automatic red teaming or being able to purple team and run these automated against the actual LLM or the model itself are super important and imperative to do. And then obviously cross-functional teaming. Google does have a trust and safety team. We have the threat intelligence team. We have security and modeling. They're all collaborating at all times to be able to stem misuse. That's it. Any questions? Is there microphones? Okay.
Can you grab that one over there for a second?
Does it work? Thank you for the presentation. That was great. My name is Chris Hughes. I listened to a Google podcast in December by interviewing Heather Adkins, I
Yes.
think is her name. And she talked about two things. One is resilience over perfect prevention, kind of like almost an assumed compromise concept.
Yes.
And the second was, hey, let's lay traps or deceptions for AI, machine speed AI attackers. What are your thoughts on those concepts?
I love deception technology. I absolutely love it. I wish more people would play with it and implement it. It's just the scale that you can do it. I find that when you have a honeypot or honey net, the effort into that, if it's not automated, it's just you're now triaging an additional thing. So if you're able to find a company or able to homegrown it yourself, it's an amazing tool. You get such early indicators and true positives versus false positives or what you find in the community, and it's specific and boutique to you and your business since they're attacking you. I love that concept. And then, resiliency is going to be a big one because going for perfect, going for metrics, trying to meet any sort of KPI, that can be grueling. But if I can actually say, hey, I want to build resilience and I want to be able to say, can I recover? And I want to be able to have multiple models or multiple ways of being able to do this, amazing. So I definitely am on board with two of those. And especially her coming from Aurora and things like that is definitely a lot of respect there.
And a plug for Google Cloud Security Podcast if you're not listening to it. It's my favorite podcast. So Antoine and Timothy Peacock.
Yes.
Yeah, so if it's something to listen to. They drop a weekly episode.
Here you go. So I put up a couple local AIs and played with them, and that's a very interesting thing how much misinformation there is. But I was asking the AI about some corporation's research, and I kept getting the same responses, whether tell me what's good about the research, tell me what's bad about the research. So I finally had this impulse, this nudge that said, ask the AI what prompting's embedded in the research. And page after page after page of research from, I won't name that corporation, other stuff on quantum computing and AI is BS. Now, how do we treat that? How do we it turns out that a lot of universities are using AI to examine papers, particularly from archive, where archive's not peer-reviewed at all. What can we do to make it so that we have a higher level of confidence from this large amounts of specialized research, I'll put it that way, improved research that gives us false answers? Yeah, an interesting problem, because I don't know how as the industry we can protect against that.
Yeah, so a lot of that, especially for local models, is going to have to do with grounding. Again, it's just like even in security operations, if you have garbage in for data, you're going to get garbage out. So it's being able to sanitize that data, building. Go ahead.
So I don't like to give away data, so I create local models. And yeah, I have enough resources to do it. But the problem is when I pull down allegedly good models and I actually query like actual services you can hire, the trouble is that I don't have an indication when I look at actual research papers, unless I read them myself, what papers do not have embedded prompting to make the papers sound better or worse than they are.
Okay, that's an interesting problem. I actually haven't run into that one yet. I've seen it with like CVs and resumes, but not actual papers. So I feel like there's some like sanitization effort there that needs to happen. I know from like a hallucinations perspective, like let's say I get a threat report or any other report, I usually tell it like, show me the line or highlight the line. So if there is something very odd about what it's saying or it's different than what I'm asking, I will validate and I will say, show me that line or highlight that line. So if it's, I can actually see if it's in the paper or not.
Have you tried Notebook LLM? Notebook LLM from Google. Like there's a application called Notebook LLM, which basically, you can trap it up and then make sure it stays within that, what you provide, doesn't go outside or doesn't leak.
Well, these are... So it's true I make local copies, but I'm using actual real LLMs. And
you probably don't want to share it with Google.
Level of negativity is such that if someone tells me they have a 10,000-bit qubit chip, I go, no, they don't. If someone tells me they have a massive system like another company we know, no, they don't. And as I research it, when I ask specific questions about the research, I get back the same answers as I manipulate the questions. The problem is most of us are going to live and die from AI, and we can't tell what's a public relations statement, what's promotion, what's made up, or what's just bad research. And that is the big question that I don't have an answer for, but it will take a lot of work for all of us to find that big answer.
Yeah, and I also think too, it's still a zero trust model. Again, I've run into it many times. The LLM's confidently incorrect, or it'll give me answers that I'm just like, there's no way. Or even when Google first started with Gemini, it wouldn't go past a certain year. And it's like, well, I want to know history from the 1800s. Like, what do you mean you don't go past this year? So yeah, I think there's a big sanitization effort there. And exactly, it's still what you're feeding it. So even though you're downloading these local copies and having it look through and parse the data, it's, are you also getting that? Where's that architecture coming from?
I had a question, what your thoughts were on the void link malware that's sort of been talked about recently that looks like a single person or a very small team developed it using AI tools, but they were very skilled at it, and it seems to be really good at avoiding detection, and it seems to be on a whole other level according to the folks that have analyzed it. What's your take on it?
I actually haven't looked into that one. But I'm not surprised at all. Like in the white paper that I showed, there are a couple examples where there are folks, adversaries, who pull down the latest models and will then compare it to like the latest detections from EDR technologies that are publicly available to quickly write 0 days or bypasses for EDR. So I think that's just going to continue to be the trend. I don't know about that specific one though.
Yeah, that specific one is interesting because unlike the other ones, it's trying to not be detected, and it's not ransomwaring anything. It's slowly stealing data And once they go in and start dumping memory, it'll delete itself and disappear on them. So they haven't seen it in the wild, but folks aren't sure if they're just not missing it.
Yeah.
So
Here you go.
First of all, thank you so much. It was an excellent presentation. I learned a lot. So my question is, supply chain attack. You know, if I'm choosing a vendor for a tool, all the vendors going to have deploy AI on their stuff. So as somebody who is trying to select a trustworthy tool, but I want to have AIs there. Well, I know one of the things you said was ask your vendors about how are the agents are being used. What are some of the examples of somebody who's looking, purchasing tools, but I don't want that to become a threat? Well, you know what I mean. You know, I wanted to help me not turning into some disaster. What are your recommendations?
Well, first I will say paranoia is a wonderful thing, especially in security. So you are asking the right questions. But for a vendor specifically, it's how do you threat model what your AI is doing? And then internally for you, it's, okay, what data or what sensitive things will I be exposing to this application? And how will that interact with AI and how they're using AI? I know for us on the Google Cloud Security side, we get a lot of questions around how do we red team ourselves? What does that look like? Show us the results from not just what Google does on the Google security side, but a third party. Show us the third party that actually red teams you and show us the results of that. So those are things that I would absolutely ask. In the security space, it's always, what's your blast radius? Can you contain that blast radius if something were to happen? So always be under the presumption that you are compromised and that will get compromised. It's just how can you contain that blast radius and what data will that expose?
You talked about hypervisors as being this golden target because of how many systems they can affect, but they're also not traditionally under visibility of EDRs. So what is the game plan in protecting them?
Microservices and segmentation. So even though you have a VM or a hypervisor, whatever it's doing, make sure it can't talk to everything. Make sure that ports and protocols are locked down. Make sure that any sort of keys or accounts, especially if they're stale, don't exist. I know a lot of people miss that, especially in the investigations in Mandiant. It's, oh, this API key existed that's either forever key, it's not rotated, or this person no longer works here as of 5 years ago, why do they still have an account? It's being able to kind of audit those accounts and the ways in, and again, assume compromise each and every time. So assume compromise that hypervisor is exposed. What do we do about it? How can we isolate it? What's our plan of action? Do we have any sort of automations in place to be able to contain what it talks to? So the big thing is usually with initial compromise is they're going to go right for AD servers. So if it's a hypervisor, they're going to go right for Active Directory or any sort of ways that they can take other identities and impersonate and escalate their privileges. So it's, you know, can I tabletop myself and red team myself to say, what does this look like if it were a bad day? And I would also suggest that if you do a tabletop, make sure to also include not just like your direct reports or people within the security, go outside of those groups. Go to legal. How would legal respond? How does outside counsel respond? How do our executives respond? How does our CISO respond? Don't just contain it to security when you're running those tabletops.
Yeah, I had a question. I liked your idea of having a minion of, threat hunter AI agents. How does that look like if I would try to implement that? Is that like, are there vendors that sell that, or am I just like building something more custom and like using one of the foundational model APIs?
Choose your own adventure. So Google does. We have our own agents that we can do. We also have a partner ecosystem. They also have their own agents, especially with like an MDR type service that they offer. I did the build it yourself approach. It does take a lot of time and vibe coding and understanding of the infrastructure, but it's choosing the right framework. That's the biggest thing, is what framework will work with my ecosystem and my tools. A lot of things that I see, especially in retail, is companies will have like over 70 security tools. And it's like, I vet them and it's like, are these even doing anything for me? So that's also a big important one. And it's, what are they bringing to the table? So as I mentioned before, if it's garbage data in, it's gonna give me garbage data out. I'm gonna get garbage results. So what's that gonna look like to my agents when I tell them to automate? I'm gonna get a lot of hallucinations. There's a thing called context bloat, or filling up the context window. That's gonna happen. So I would definitely, again, if you wanna build it yourself, there are frameworks that already exist. 80K is ours, and that's the one I use. But if you're gonna look to vendors as well, that's a great question for vendors, is how do you orchestrate that? And then the follow-up would be, okay, what's the human in the loop component? And how are we involved? Because you always wanna have a human in the loop component.
Excellent presentation. Earlier, you had the slide about which country is which threat,
yeah.
And then the nature of the threat or the purpose of the threat. Like, how do you know? Like, how do you know? Like, how do you categorize that? How did you know that?
So, so a lot of those are nation states, and we call them the Big Four for a reason. They're very loud and proud about what they do. So again, it's either financial, it's geopolitical, it's what's going on in the world, and we're able to attribute that based on the campaigns that they're running and who they're attacking. So it's a lot of internal intelligence, it's a lot of historical references, and then it's just a lot of them just being very, very arrogant and being very outright of, this is what we're doing and who we're attacking, and we don't care who knows about it. We want you to know about it.
Thank you.
A lot of questions. This is great.
It is awesome.
It's awesome.
I love this interactive crowd. This is the first meeting of the year.
Awesome. So some of the browser vendors are integrating LLMs in the browser, right? And usually those are low-end LLMs that can run in laptops and so on. And at the same time, those LLMs have access to auth tokens that can actually get, personal data. And it's an internet-facing type of application. How are those vendors securing this kind of applications? I mean, these browsers.
Browser isolation and disable those extensions. That's going to be your big one. And the big one too with that is like, look for a vendor, like we have something like Google, like Chrome, that can disable things like copy paste and info stealers. Like that's a huge one within browsers, right, is the info stealers. So it's being able to build controls around that. So again, if you assume compromise and it's, oh yes, this extension, this weird extension that's now talking to China, what do we do about it? It's being able to walk through those steps. And again, look at it and say, what can I disable? What's not needed? And copy paste is usually a big one, and being able to redact sensitive data. So if the LLM tries to look at it, it can't, and it can't determine what it is. And then if it tries to upload it to a GitHub or take your keys and move off with it, it's unable to. So it's isolating that session within the browser.
So is the recommendation disable the AI on browser? Is that what's the best way?
No, you don't. Yeah, if you can, if you want the easy button, sure. But I think, yeah, the biggest one is just monitoring the connections that it's doing and monitoring the behaviors that it's doing. And if you start seeing outliers or it's starting to do weird things, then you know something's up.
Check. I have a question about guardrailing AI, which you mentioned.
Yes.
The prompt injection and other AI-related threats are on the rise. So I've been vetting a lot of vendors that are claiming to achieve some sort of security when it comes to guardrailing AI. But on the other hand, there's a wave of very vocal experts in the field saying it's unachievable just because AIs are non-deterministic by design. I was wondering what Google has to say in that battle, like, if we can really guardrail AI, because the approach right now is just simply putting another LLM to validate the output of the primary LLM, but both are non-deterministic. So is that really possible to achieve a true guardrailing of AI or not?
That's a trap question.
It is.
So I'm not from the AI team, so I can't really say Gemini or the other models, but I can tell you my experience as well, especially about building guardrails, is it's an ever-changing landscape. Just like the threat landscape, it's ever-changing. When we say we patch something or do something or we build a guardrail around one thing, the threat actors or adversaries find another way around it. So to say that there's going to be true guardrails, I personally don't think that's ever going to happen. That's a very, very hard, tough thing to do, especially with non-deterministic models, because it just wants to please you. It just wants to give you an output. It just wants to give the information out. So, you know, between the hallucinations, being confidently incorrect, and giving me other information that I didn't even ask for, building those safeguards and, you know, again, non-deterministic, it can't determine, is this someone being malicious? Is this someone just learning something new and I'm blocking them from that? That's a difficult cycle.
So maybe we just need another approach rather than just using LLM to validate LLM.
Yeah, no, I've seen that too. So they use cheaper LLMs to gather whatever and then report to the parent. And that's a more expensive model. But at the end of the day, it's like, who has unlimited budget and TPUs? Not even us, right? They cap us too, especially as I'm building my agents. So.
Thank you.
Yeah. Is that it? We're good?
One more here.
Cool.
I have one really hard question.
Okay.
Years ago, I was at some research facility, and we were studying Configure. And then, you know, we were studying the bears, and we were studying these different wonderful, not Petya, wonderful attacks that took, you know, dozens, perhaps 100 people, months of effort by nation states to produce. Now, they have all one thing in common. No two of them are alike in any way. How do you imagine that AI would catch these specific kinds of completely original, complex, I mean, you know, blocking all, you know, just like in Ukraine, you know, they updated turned off all the substations, and then they updated the software so they bricked all the machines. This is not the stuff that you find in a textbook. This is stuff you research with people, and there are no two cases are alike. So how do we address those?
Yeah, so that's going to go off of historical, and that's where I say human in loop is a critical component, because LLMs are not going to have that historical or tribal knowledge of, oh, I saw this malware variant and this is how it reacts and this is what it does. So it's being able to do behavior modeling. So even though IOCs change constant, right? Like when you look at the pyramid of pain, you see that like hashes, MD5s, IP addresses, they're very low and they're very easy to block. And we've been able to figure out a way to automate that. But when we move towards behaviors, that's where things get more expensive. So the goal is usually to, if we can disrupt the adversary and make them retool, it costs them money too. So looking at LLMs to do that, we can treat it as like a repository or build a RAG around those previous historical functions. And then if there is a behavior that it can indicate that it's like, even though it's non-deterministic, it can flag it up or raise it up. We usually call it in Google SecOps like a Z-score or a risk score. So we can attach a risk score to it. And once it reaches a certain threshold where we say, we've seen these behaviors before, very similar behaviors, but it's a different IP address, it's a different hash, it's different this, it can still raise it up to say, this is something you should possibly look at. So it's not completely solving for it, but it's giving us that, you know, it's giving us that needle in the noise.
Guys, big hand to Sandy, dude. Thank you so much for doing this. Amazing job.